My ex-wife left me and our kids to find herself. 9 years later, she stormed their school, lied to staff, and had to be escorted out by police. 9 years ago, when my son Liam was 6 and my daughter Sophie was 4, my ex-wife Rachel made a decision that would radically alter all of our lives. We had been going through a difficult period in our marriage, which wasn't totally her fault because I was working long hours and maybe wasn't the most attentive spouse. However, we were both trying to make things work for our families. Rachel's difficulty began when she started spending time with a group of friends from her yoga class. Women who were either divorced or had never been married appeared to have strong feelings about traditional family structures and the limits that marriage and motherhood imposed on a woman's personal development. These friends, particularly a woman named Maya, who had left her own family years before and was living what she called her authentic life, traveling the country in a converted van, began to fill Rachel's mind with ideas about how she was wasting her youth by being bogged down by domestic responsibilities. At first, I assumed it was a phase and encouraged her to go on weekend trips with these pals, even volunteering to take on more childcare responsibilities so she could explore her interests freely. However, rather than improving her relationship, this exacerbated it because the more time she spent away from home, the more distant she grew from me and the kids, and the more persuaded she became that she had made a terrible mistake by marrying and having children so young. The breaking point occurred during what I believed would be a family holiday to the beach, rather than enjoying our time together. Rachel spent most of the trip on the phone with Maya and her friends, discussing how stuck she felt and how she needed to make huge changes before it was too late. Rachel told me on our last night at the beach after the kids had gone to bed that she had decided to leave us and start over somewhere fresh, where she could discover who she truly was without the constraints of family life. She stated that Maya had offered her a residence in California and that she believed it would be best for everyone if she simply withdrew from our life, rather than continue to be a source of unhappiness. I was absolutely saddened and did everything to persuade her to continue with marriage counseling, individual treatment, temporary separation, and even an open marriage. But her mind was made up, and she saw any attempt to change her opinion as an attempt to control her and keep her from living her genuine life. The worst aspect was seeing how bewildered and heartbroken Liam and Sophie were when Rachel told them she was moving away for a bit and would be staying with me, though she vowed that this did not mean she loved them any less and that she would return to visit as soon as she was settled. Liam continued, wondering if he had done anything wrong to cause Mommy to want to leave, while Sophie wailed and begged Rachel not to leave. After Rachel departed, I found myself as a single father of 2 small children, dealing with abandonment issues and continually wondering when their mother would return home, all while processing my own feelings of betrayal and sadness. The first few months were difficult as I figured out how to balance employment, childcare, household chores, and my emotional well-being, all while assisting Liam and Sophie in navigating their emotions and trying to provide stability in their lives. Rachel called on occasion over the first year, generally late at night when she had been drinking and felt bad. However, these chats were confusing and harmful for the children, since she would make promises about visiting that she never kept. I eventually changed our phone number and requested her to stop calling because the intermittent communication was making things worse for Liam and Sophie, who would get their hopes up only to be disappointed when she left again. Around 3 years after Rachel departed, I met my present wife Dana at a school fundraiser where she was helping as Sophie's teacher, and what began as a friendship evolved into something deeper. Dana was extremely understanding of my baggage and the difficulties of dating someone whose children are still traumatized by their mother's leaving. What impressed me the most about Dana was how organically she connected with Liam and Sophie, never attempting to replace their mother or force a bond, but simply being present and constant in such a way that they gradually came to trust her. She would help Sophie with her homework, attend Liam's soccer games, and gradually integrate into our daily routines without feeling forced. After nearly 2 years of dating, Dana and I began discussing adoption. Dana was determined to be a parent, regardless of what occurred between her and me. The adoption process was simple because Rachel had practically vanished and made no attempt to maintain touch or provide financial assistance, which was legally considered abandonment. When the adoption was completed last year, it was one of the best days of our lives. Liam and Sophie, now 15 and 13, have developed into great teenagers who have formed a strong attachment with Dana, whom they refer to as Mom, without urging from us. They recall their birth mother, but those memories have faded and been replaced by the reality of their current family, and they see Rachel as a character from the distant past rather than someone who is currently relevant to their lives. Rachel appeared at our front door 3 weeks ago, looking older but otherwise unchanged, claiming she had been thinking about us constantly and had finally realized that leaving was the biggest mistake of her life and that she wanted to return and be a part of our family again. She explained that she had spent 9 years traveling the country, working various jobs, exploring different lifestyles and relationships in an attempt to find herself. But nothing had provided the satisfaction she expected, and she had gradually realized that the happiness she was looking for had always been right here with us. I was surprised to see her because I thought she had moved on entirely. I invited her in for coffee and asked Dana to come home early so that we could discuss how to deal with this together. Dana was wonderfully cordial despite her discomfort with Rachel's unexpected reappearance. Rachel appeared really sorry and admitted she had made a terrible mistake, but she also had unrealistic expectations about being able to just return to our lives, as if the previous 9 years had never happened. She expressed a desire to spend time with Liam and Sophie, take them on outings, help them with homework, attend school activities, and gradually reestablish the mother-child relationship she had abandoned. The real test came when Liam and Sophie returned home from school and discovered their biological mother sitting in the living room. The children's emotions were fast and obvious. Liam became obviously agitated and questioned Rachel, why she had returned and whether she wanted them to simply forget everything and welcome her back, while Sophie hid behind Dana and refused to look at Rachel. Both children made it plain that they had no desire to have a relationship with Rachel and considered Dana to be their natural mother. Rachel was upset by their rejection and attempted to explain that she understood their outrage and was prepared to take things carefully. But Liam intervened, saying there was nothing she could do to compensate for the 9-year absence and that they already had a mother who cared for them. After Rachel left, Dana and I had a lengthy chat with the kids about what they wanted us to do, emphasizing that we would support whatever decision they made and that they should not feel compelled to have a connection with Rachel if they did not wish to. Both Liam and Sophie were insistent that they wanted nothing to do with Rachel, didn't want her coming to our house or contacting them at school. It asked us to make sure she realized they were content with their existing family and didn't need her, so this is where might be the boy. I phoned Rachel and informed her that while I understood her desire to reconnect, the kids had expressed their feelings clearly, and I would respect their wishes rather than force them into a relationship against their choice. I explained that they were old enough to make their own decisions about who they wanted in their life, and that, after 9 years of having a solid family with Dana, they didn't want to break it for someone who had voluntarily left. Rachel grew enraged and accused me of poisoning the children against her, stopping her from exercising her parental rights and threatening legal action to compel visits or seek partial custody, though I'm not sure she has any legal standing after abandoning them and allowing Dana to adopt them. I honestly don't know if I'm doing the correct thing and keep second-guessing myself because while I believe Rachel's sudden desire to be a mother again stems from guilt rather than genuine care for Liam and Sophie's well-being, I wonder if I'm depriving them of the opportunity to connect with their original mother. So, Reddit aita for supporting my children's decision to shun contact with their original mother. Or should I be urging them to give her another chance? Update. One quick update for those following along because things have changed in unexpected ways, and I could use some more perspective on how we're dealing with Rachel's ongoing attempts to inject herself into our family's lives. After reading your sensible comments, I decided to schedule consultations with a family attorney and an adoption therapist to ensure I was approaching this with Liam and Sophie's best interests in mind, rather than simply responding emotionally. The legal session was extremely informative and a big relief because the attorney confirmed what many of you had suggested. Rachel's legal rights as a parent were essentially terminated when she abandoned the children and Dana was free to adopt them without Rachel's permission. In our jurisdiction, parental rights can be revoked for abandonment. If a parent has not communicated for more than a year and has failed to provide financial assistance, both of which plainly apply to Rachel. Practically speaking, Rachel has no legal standing to demand visitation or custody, and any attempt to challenge the adoption would require her to demonstrate that she was prevented from maintaining contact against her will, which is obviously not the case because she chose to leave and made no effort to stay in touch. I phoned Rachel to have a straight chat about the truth of the issue, believing that if I communicated the legal realities and the children's choices, she would recognize that continuing with this would be pointless and potentially damaging. The talk did not proceed as planned, but it did provide insight into Rachel's thoughts when I explained that adoption had legally terminated her parental rights. Rachel became enraged and accused me of using legal jargon to keep her separated from her children, as if the adoption was a bureaucratic ruse rather than a natural result of her neglect. What became evident was that Rachel had created a narrative about her leaving that minimized her culpability while emphasizing external causes, such as her friends' recommendations and mental health issues. She continued referring to leaving as something that happened to her rather than a decision she made, and she appeared shocked that there would be long-term effects. She also had excessive hopes for repairing ties with Liam and Sophie, mentioning her desire to take them on excursions and assist with college plans, as if the previous 9 years had been a minor interruption rather than the majority of their conscious memories. When I explained that both children had made it clear that they did not want contact and that I would respect their wishes, Rachel burst into tears, saying she understood their anger but was a different person now and deserved a chance to prove she could be the mother they needed. Instead of threatening legal action, Rachel inquired whether there was any way to contact Liam and Sophie indirectly, such as through letters or phone conversations, so that she could apologize without forcing them to meet in person. I assured her I would talk to Dana and the kids about it, emphasizing that any communication would be fully voluntary and could end at any point if it became unpleasant. When I brought this up with Liam and Sophie, their reactions were varied, but just as strong. Sophie determined after several family discussions and a therapy session that she would accept Rachel's phone number and possibly chat on occasion, but only if Rachel knew that this did not imply Sophie desired a relationship or was open to in-person encounters. Liam remained adamantly opposed to any contact, and I made it clear to Rachel that she had to follow his decision entirely. So I gave Rachel Sophie's phone number yesterday, and Liam agreed to offer his number as well. But he made it clear that he was not pledging to answer calls and might change his mind at any time. I also put clear limits on when and how frequently Rachel might call, asking her to limit contact to once or twice a week and to avoid calling during school hours or late at night. Rachel was extremely happy for this compromise and vowed to respect the kids' boundaries and not press them for more interaction than they were comfortable with, though I'm uncertain that she actually adhered to these restrictions given how eager she seemed to want to reconnect. I'm not sure whether I made the correct decision, Part of me is concerned that any interaction may give Rachel false optimism that she would be able to work her way back into a more major role, leading to further disappointment and conflict. At the same time, I don't want to make this decision. For Liam and Sophie, especially when Sophie showed genuine interest in limited contact. I guess we'll see how this goes, but I wanted to inform everyone who has been following our situation and let you know that your advice about prioritizing the children's mental well-being has been quite helpful. Update 2. As I noted in my previous report, we had agreed to allow Rachel limited phone contact with the understanding that communication would be purely voluntary, and that she would adhere to our established frequency and scheduling guidelines. For the first few days, it appeared to operate fairly effectively. Rachel contacted Sophie twice this week, and she answered both times, engaging in brief but polite chats about school and her interests. Sophie later told me that the chat seemed awkward and forced, and she didn't know what to say to someone who was essentially a stranger, but kept referring to herself as Sophie's mother. Liam kept his word and refused to answer Rachel's calls, finally blocking her phone after she called numerous times in one day, which I thought was a sensible method to preserve his boundaries. The problem began this week when Sophie, dealing with midterm exams and a big presentation she was nervous about, stopped answering Rachel's calls because she was busy studying and didn't have the emotional energy for what she described as awkward conversations with someone who doesn't really know me. Instead of understanding that a 13-year-old may have other priorities, Rachel became increasingly anxious about not reaching Sophie and began calling more frequently. Sophie showed me some of these voicemails, which were troubling since Rachel seemed very passionate and almost frantic, stressing about how much she missed Sophie and how essential these discussions were to her mental health and hopes of mending their relationship. One letter particularly disturbed me because Rachel stated that she had been looking forward to their conversations all week and that not hearing from Sophie was bringing back all of her feelings of loss and sorrow. When I asked Sophie about the voicemails, she revealed that they were making her feel guilty and worried, and that she was beginning to regret agreeing to any contact since she thought Rachel expected more than she could or would give. She admitted that talking to Rachel seemed like homework rather than something she wanted to do. I informed Sophie that she owed Rachel nothing and that she could stop receiving calls at any time without feeling guilty, and we agreed she would take a break from phone communication to focus on her academics and give herself time to consider whether she wanted to continue with this arrangement. But instead of respecting Sophie's need for space or asking me why calls weren't being answered, Rachel made a decision that absolutely shattered any trust I had in her ability to prioritize the children's needs over her own. Yesterday afternoon, I received a call from Sophie's school counselor informing me that an unknown woman had arrived at the school, claiming to be Sophie's mother and demanding to see her, and that the school had to call security when the woman became agitated and refused to leave when told she was not authorized to visit Sophie. Apparently, Rachel went to the school office around lunch and informed the secretary that she was Sophie's biological mother and needed to meet with her daughter due to a family emergency. When school personnel examined their records and discovered that Dana was listed as Sophie's mother in emergency contact, they informed Rachel that she could not see Sophie without formal consent. According to the counselor, Rachel grew enraged and began arguing with staff, claiming that there had been an error in their records, that she was Sophie's biological mother and had every right to see her kid, and that the school was interfering with her parental rights. Rachel appears to have attempted to hunt for Sophie on her own, strolling down corridors and looking into classes, prompting the school to call security and eventually police to accompany her off campus. Sophie was clearly unhappy and embarrassed when I picked her up from school, and she kept questioning why Rachel had gone to her school and whether Rachel would continue to show up in places where Sophie was supposed to feel safe. She also stated that she felt it was somehow her fault for not returning Rachel's calls. Which broke my heart because a 13-year-old should never feel accountable for an adult's inappropriate actions. I immediately contacted Rachel and told her unequivocally that attending Sophie's school was utterly unacceptable, that she had breached every limit we had set and undermined our faith in her. I stated that Sophie had been terrified by her actions, which had resulted in the very drama we were attempting to prevent. Rachel's reaction was defensive and emotional, stating she was worried about Sophie because she hadn't heard from her in several days and just wanted to make sure Sophie was okay, and that she hadn't meant to put her under pressure with the voicemails. She stated she had no intention of causing trouble and had informed the school. There was a family emergency since she didn't know how else to gain Sophie's attention. When I pointed out that there was no family emergency and that she had essentially lied to school officials and attempted to circumvent safety protocols, Rachel said that not being able to communicate with her daughter felt like an emergency to her, and she didn't understand why everyone was making this so difficult when all she wanted was a relationship with her children. This response demonstrated how profoundly Rachel misunderstood the situation and how self-centered her approach has been. She sees any impediment to immediate access to Liam and Sophie as an unfair violation of her rights as a mother, rather than acknowledging that her children are persons with their own feelings and rights to privacy and safety. I informed Rachel that her behavior at school had precluded any potential of ongoing phone communication and that she needed to stay completely away from our family, including not showing up anywhere where the kids could be. I also told her that if she crossed these boundaries again, I would file a restraining order. Rachel became enraged and began crying, accusing me of being cruel and exploiting her mistake to punish her and keep her separated from her children indefinitely. But I made it obvious that this was not about punishment. It was about protecting Liam and Sophie from someone who had demonstrated an inability to respect their autonomy or put their well-being ahead of her own. Following the incident, both children have made it clear that they do not want to contact Rachel again. Sophie appears relieved that she no longer has to worry about meeting Rachel's standards. I'm honestly punishing myself for agreeing to any contact at all because I should have realized that someone who abandoned her children for 9 years and then showed up wanting an immediate relationship most likely had the emotional stability to accept sensible boundaries. I'll keep you posted on whether Rachel maintains the no-contact boundary or if we need to seek legal protection. But for the time being, we're focused on making Liam and Sophie feel safe and secure, as well as reminding them that Rachel's behavior is not their responsibility. Update 3. Following the school incident described in my previous update, we implemented strict no contact with Rachel and made it clear to both kids that they no longer needed to worry about managing her expectations and could focus on their normal lives without the stress of navigating a relationship with someone who had demonstrated an inability to respect their boundaries. For about a week, this seemed to work well, and both Liam and Sophie appeared happy to have the matter settled in a way that allowed them to move forward without constant worry about whether Rachel would call or show up suddenly. However, Sophie approached me and Dana on Friday evening with a request that astonished both of us, and that I'm still not convinced we handled properly. Sophie told us that she had been thinking about Rachel's voicemail from before the school incident, and that while she didn't want to have an ongoing relationship with Rachel, she felt she needed to call her once to clearly explain her decision and tell Rachel directly that she didn't want any further contact rather than having me communicate this message on her behalf. Sophie expressed guilt about how things had ended, with Rachel being escorted off school grounds and then informed through me that all contact had been terminated and that she believed Rachel deserved to hear directly from Sophie why she did not want a relationship, even if the conversation was difficult. And final, Dana and I went over this extensively with Sophie, making sure she understood that she didn't owe Rachel an explanation and that protecting her own well-being was more important than controlling Rachel's emotions. We also discussed the risk that calling Rachel would offer her false hope or that Rachel would take advantage of the situation to pressure Sophie for greater contact. Sophie was, however, quite clear about her goals and appeared to have properly considered the potential hazards. She claimed she wanted to tell Rachel that while she didn't hate her and understood Rachel's remorse for leaving, the harm had been done and too much time had passed for them to form the mother-daughter bond Rachel seemed to desire. We agreed that the call would be made on speakerphone so Dana and I could monitor it and help if necessary, and Sophie would have a written list of points to make so she wouldn't get sidetracked if Rachel became emotional. The call took place on Saturday afternoon, and it went both better and worse than we expected. Sophie was extremely mature in explaining her feelings to Rachel, telling her that she appreciated Rachel's apologies and desired to make amends, but that she had built a life and family without Rachel, and she didn't want to change that orgy of parties. The security and happiness she had found with Dana as her mother. Rachel, to her credit, listened without interrupting or arguing, and appeared to accept Sophie's final decision. She informed Sophie that she was pleased of the person Sophie had become, and that she was delighted Sophie had found happiness and security even if it wasn't through her. However, near the end of the interview, Rachel grew extremely upset and informed Sophie that she understood why Sophie didn't want her in her life and that she was aware that she had made irreversible choices that had lost her the opportunity to be a mother to her children. She stated that she had hoped that returning and apologizing would compensate for the years she had missed, but that she now realizes that some damage and choices cannot be undone. Rachel's tone at this section was especially disturbing since it sounded definitive and hopeless, as if she was saying goodbye not only to the chance of a relationship with Sophie, but to everything else as well. She continued saying how she had ruined everything and that she did not deserve to be happy. After what she had done, Sophie handled this maturely, focusing on her own decisions rather than attempting to soothe Rachel. Although I could tell she was saddened by Rachel's depressed tone, Rachel closed the call by thanking Sophie for being brave enough to speak to her personally, wishing Sophie a good life and apologizing for all the suffering her homecoming had caused. Sophie told Rachel that she'd forgiven her for leaving and hoped Rachel found happiness in her own life, but they would not speak again. Sophie looked relieved to have had the conversation and satisfied that she had been able to express her views clearly and respectfully, even though she was emotionally exhausted and spent the rest of the weekend processing her feelings with Dana and myself. We believe that this talk gave Sophie and Rachel the closure they needed to go on with their separate lives, and that while emotionally painful, it was ultimately a healthy way to close this chapter. But then this past Tuesday morning, I received a phone call that changed everything and made me wonder if we should have approached this problem differently from the start. The call came from a hospital social worker in the city where Rachel has been living, informing me that Rachel had been admitted to their psychiatric unit following what appeared to be a suicide attempt and that I was listed as her emergency contact from when we were married, despite the fact that we had been divorced for 9 years. According to the social worker, Rachel overdosed on prescription medication on Monday night and was discovered by her landlord after failing to pay her rent. She had written a note apologizing for the anguish she had caused her family and admitting that she had lost her children forever and could not live with the guilt and remorse of her decisions. I was utterly surprised and frightened by this news, and my initial thought was that Sophie's phone conversation had somehow caused Rachel's suicide attempt and that I was guilty for putting Rachel in a dangerous mental condition by supporting Sophie's choice to discontinue communication forever. I've just told Dana thus far. I then called the hospital social worker to describe our family situation, which included Rachel abandoning the children 9 years ago, and any contact with her being painful and destabilizing for them. I instructed the social worker to tell Rachel that while we hoped she would receive the necessary mental health therapy, we would not be visiting or participating in her care in any manner. I also gave the social worker the contact information for Rachel's sister, who lives across the country, but may be able to provide family support during Rachel's recovery, because I felt Rachel shouldn't be completely alone during this crisis, even if we couldn't provide it. Ourselves, the social worker was very understanding of our situation and assured me that the hospital staff would not pressure us to have contact with Rachel against our will, but would instead focus on connecting her with appropriate mental health resources and support systems that did not involve her children. It's been a few days since that phone call, and I'm still wondering if we could have handled this situation differently, if there were warning signs we overlooked, and if protecting my children from Rachel's instability was worth the risk that she would harm herself as a result of feeling completely rejected. I wanted to update everyone who has been following our story because this development clearly alters the nature of the situation, and I'm hoping that sharing our experience will be beneficial to other families dealing with similar challenges involving arranged parents who want to reconnect with children who have moved on with their lives.